Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Friday, March 21st, 2025. President Donald Trump and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth say that Elon Musk's meeting at the Pentagon this morning was to talk about government efficiency and innovation and not, as the New York Times reported, U.S. war plans for a potential war with China. President and the Secretary also announced that Boeing will be building the next generation of Air Force fighter jet to be called the F-47. The President has also asked about reports the U.S. may relinquish the top military position at NATO and the ongoing court case involving alleged gang members deported to El Salvador. United Nations Security Council holds a meeting about the war between Israel and Hamas and the Israeli settlements in the West Bank. More contentious town hall meetings with members of Congress. And Florida First Lady Casey DeSantis asked about whether she wants to run for governor in 2026 when her husband, Governor Ron DeSantis' term expires. Story from Reuters: billionaire Elon Musk held a meeting for more than an hour at the Pentagon on Friday morning as the close ally of President Donald Trump called for the prosecutions of any Pentagon officials leaking false information about his visit. Musk, who is making sweeping cuts to the U.S. federal government, had been expected to get an overview of a number of sensitive topics. The New York Times reported he would be briefed on secret war plans for China, something Musk, Trump, and others denied. Article from Reuters. When the New York Times published its article Thursday night, President Trump posted on Truth Social, "The fake news is an enemy of the people, and Elon is not being briefed on anything China by the Department of War." Today, President Trump and Secretary Hegseth were asked about this during an Oval Office news conference.
You guys are denying this New York Times report that Elon Musk was going to be shown a 20 to 30 page presentation about a theoretical war plan against China. Why not just show it to Elon?
Because I don't want to show it to anybody. You know, you're talking about a potential war with China. Now, I deal with these people all the time, and I'm dealing with Pete. I'm dealing with these gentlemen on numerous different airplane purchases, and I think they're all going to be great. But I don't want other people seeing, anybody seeing potential war with China. We don't want to have a potential war with China, but I can tell you if we did, we're very well equipped to handle it. But I don't want to show that to anybody. But certainly you wouldn't show it to a businessman who is helping us so much. He's a great patriot. He's paying a big price for helping us cut costs, and he's doing a great job. He's finding tremendous waste, fraud, and abuse. But I certainly wouldn't want, Elon has businesses in China, and he would be susceptible perhaps to that. But it was such a fake story. The New York Times is just as fake as CNN and MSDNC. And anybody read that story, people laughed at that story. Who would do such a thing? And the first thing I did is I called Susie and I called Pete. I said, is there any truth to that? And they said, it's ridiculous. No, he's over there to talk about costs. You might want to address that, Pete. But Elon was over there today to address costs. DOGE, thing called DOGE, which you've heard about. Pete?
That's exactly right, Mr. President. You pointed out it was a fake story. We pointed out it was meant to sort of undermine whatever relationship the Pentagon has with Elon Musk. Elon Musk is a patriot. Elon Musk is an innovator. Elon Musk provides a lot of capabilities our government and our military rely on, and I'm grateful for that. We welcomed him today to the Pentagon to talk about DOGE, to talk about efficiencies, to talk about innovations. It was a great informal conversation. The rest of that reporting was fake. There was no war plans. There was no Chinese war plans. There was no secret plans. That's not what we were doing at the Pentagon.
I might add that I think Elon, if they ever wanted to do that, I think Elon wouldn't do it. I think he wouldn't do it. He wouldn't want to put himself in that position. But if you read what's out of the New York Times, it's such a dishonest newspaper. It's such garbage. It's, it used to be called all the news that's fit to print. Well, it's all the news that's not fit to print. They have fake sources, or they don't have sources. I think they make most of it up. But this was a made-up story by the New York Times. I call it the failing. It's a failing newspaper. It's failing. And they shouldn't do that. They really are the enemy of the people.
President Donald Trump and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth in the White House Oval Office. The news conference there came after their opening statements in which the president announced that Boeing will be building the next generation fighter jet for the U.S. Air Force.
I'm thrilled to announce that at my direction, the United States Air Force is moving forward with the world's first sixth-generation fighter jet. Number sixth generation. Nothing in the world comes even close to it, and it'll be known as the F-47. The generals picked a title, and it's a beautiful number, F-47. It's something the likes of which nobody has seen before in terms of all of the attributes of a fighter jet. There's never been anything even close to it, from speed to maneuverability to what it can have to payload. And this has been in the works for a long period of time. After a rigorous and thorough competition between some of America's top aerospace companies, the Air Force is going to be awarding the contract for the next generation air dominance platform to Boeing. As you know, it was highly competed for. There was a lot of competition, generals, and it's been going on for a long time. Very, very tough competition.
President Donald Trump in the White House Oval Office. There's a story from Defense Scoop. Original estimates for the 6th-gen aircraft were predicted to be around $300 million per unit. But Air Force Secretary Frank Kendall said last year his ideal price point would be similar to the F-35 Lightning II, about $100 million, depending on the variant. The Air Force requested $2.7 billion for the platform in its budget request for fiscal 2025, indicating that it planned to spend $19.6 billion on the aircraft over the next 5 years. That was Defense Scoop. President Trump was also asked today about an NBC News report this week that the U.S. may give up the role of NATO Supreme Allied Commander Europe, which has been, for NATO's 75-year history, a 4-star U.S. general that oversees all NATO military operations in Europe, which now includes the war in Ukraine. NBC News citing 2 defense officials familiar with the planning and a Pentagon briefing reviewed by NBC News. Here's the question to the president.
Is the U.S. planning to give up the position of NATO's Supreme Allied Commander, and if so, why?
NATO is something that I saved. NATO was gone until I came along. In fact, the previous Secretary General, very good man, both of them are good. The current man is fantastic. But both of them have said, if it wasn't for Trump, you wouldn't even have a NATO, because we were paying the cost of almost all of the countries, and now they're paying. I said, we're not going to do this. We're not going to continue. You hurt us on trade. You do bad things on trade, and then on top of it, we're supposed to pay for your military. And because of what I did, hundreds of billions of dollars flowed into NATO by countries that just weren't paying. They were delinquent. They weren't paying their bills. So NATO is solid. They're strong. But they have to treat us fairly.
Are we going to give up the...
Because, look, without us, NATO's not the same thing. And I can tell you, I've been having very good discussions, as you know, with President Zelensky and with President Putin. And President Putin will tell you that without the United States, he wouldn't be worried. But he is worried when the United States is involved. And I have to tell you, I've dealt very well with both gentlemen, and we have, I think we have the confines of a deal. I hope we have the confines of a deal. I'm doing it for 2 reasons. Number one, and by far most importantly, thousands of young people, and they're not American people, they're Russian and they're Ukrainian, are being killed every week, thousands a week. And also the United States has paid, because of Biden, $350 billion on a war that should have never happened.
President Donald Trump, part of the news conference today in the White House Oval Office. He took questions on many topics, including the ongoing court case over deportation flights. Democracy Docket reports that a federal judge vowed to determine if Trump administration officials disobeyed a court order halting deportations under an 18th century wartime law. District Judge James Boasberg said during a court hearing Friday, "I will get to the bottom of whether they violated my order, who ordered this, and what the consequences will be." The Trump administration last week appeared to have violated Boasberg's previous order in a lawsuit challenging the Trump administration's use of the Alien Enemies Act to deport hundreds of Venezuelans to El Salvador without due process. Another question to President Donald Trump in the White House Oval Office.
Mr. President, do you think you have the authority, the power to round up people, deport them, and then you're under no obligation to a court to show the evidence against them?
Well, that's what the law says, and that's what our country needs, because we were, unfortunately, they allowed millions of people to come into our country, totally unvetted, totally unchecked. So you ought to ask, did he have the authority to allow millions of people? Did Biden have the authority to do something that's unthinkable? have open borders where millions of people poured into our country, totally unvetted and totally unchecked, just as you would say. And many of those people were criminals. Many of them were from jails and prisons and mental institutions and gang members and drug dealers and very dangerous people. Many were murderers. We have 11,088 that we know of murderers they murdered. Of that number, at least half killed more than one person. They're in our country. They're in a location near you. Biden allowed that to happen to our country. And his people that really ran the country. And the person that operated the auto pen, I think we ought to find out who that was, because I guess that was the real president. So when you ask me if we have the authority, did Biden have the authority to allow millions of people to come into our country? Many of these people hardened criminals at the top of the line who have caused tremendous damage in our country.
President Donald Trump answering reporters' questions in the White House Oval Office, joined by Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth. This is Washington Today. This week, the Pentagon reversed its decision to remove some web pages from the DoD website that had been taken down because of the President and Secretary's orders concerning DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Some of those pages celebrated baseball great Jackie Robinson's military service, Tuskegee Airmen, and Women's Air Force Service Pilots, or WASPs, also the Navajo Code Talkers. Pentagon Press Secretary Sean Parnell put out this video on Thursday.
Hey everyone, I want to take a short moment to provide some clarity on our efforts to ensure that our public-facing content honors our warfighters, our mission, and reflects President Trump and Secretary Hegseth's priorities. Over the past few weeks, we've taken action to identify and archive DEI content from our websites and social media platforms. The previous administration's zealous and destructive commitment to DEI not only divided our nation and weakened our force, but it also reduced our country's finest to their immutable characteristics. Without question, this task was an arduous but incredibly important undertaking. We enforced an aggressive timeline for our DoD services and agencies to comb through a vast array of content while ensuring that our force remains ready and lethal. Every now and then, because of the realities of AI tools and other software, some important content was incorrectly pulled offline to be reviewed. We want to be very, very clear. History is not DEI. When content is either mistakenly removed or if it's maliciously removed, we continue to work quickly to restore it. We are so proud of our nation's heroes and our heritage. We honor the accomplishments of our warfighters and the content of their character. Americans past and present are the greatest people the world has ever known, and we live in the greatest country the world has ever known, and our strength now and has always been our unity and shared purpose.
Pentagon Press Secretary Sean Parnell posting that video. Story from the New York Post. The head of the federal task force to combat anti-Semitism dismissed rumors Thursday that Columbia University was nearing a deal to restore $400 million in federal funds frozen by the Trump administration, arguing that the Ivy League school was not even close to meeting President Trump's demands. Local outlet ABC TV and the Wall Street Journal have both reported that Columbia University was nearing a deal to meet 9 preconditions set forth by the Trump administration that would allow it to consider restoring funding amounting to roughly 8% of the institution's U.S. taxpayer funding. That was from the New York Post. Leo Terrell heads the task force at the Justice Department. He was on WABC Radio on Thursday.
Our goal, as I said, President Trump, Pam Bondi, and our goal is to eradicate anti-Semitism. There was a rumor out there that there is a settlement approaching to restore Columbia's $400 million that we froze. Let me be very clear to your listeners and to the nation and to the Jewish American community. That's not true. I don't know how that story got out, but that story is not true, because Columbia University is not an example of a university that is free from anti-Semitism. So I want to be clear about that. President Trump and Pam Bondi have made it a commitment at this task force. We're going to eradicate anti-Semitism at all these schools, and I will submit to you, Rita, that's not happening at this point at Columbia University.
Wow. So you would know if something was in the works, right? I mean, and what were the criteria that you were asking Colombia to abide by? I understand it was sort of a list of, and a lot of them, I thought, bravo, no more masks, a whole bunch of different things. Can you kind of give us in broad strokes what they were?
I'm going to make sure I am crystal clear because, like I said again, I am fortunate and blessed to work for President Trump and Pam Bondi. Whatever stories that the American people heard, the Jewish American community heard about a settlement and the terms, not true. Where did the source come from?
Well, this morning I heard the news, and they said that they're agreeing to 9 of 10 demands. And if you're telling me it's not true, it was on the news this morning.
Let me say, you got Leo Terrell on the phone. I had the task force. I work for Pam Bondi, and I work for President Trump. And I will tell you right now that Colombia has not, in my opinion, and the opinion of the Department of Justice, have not cleaned up their act regarding anti-Semitism. I'm also telling you that there is no agreement. They're not even close to having those funds unfrozen. Now, that's all I can tell you right now because settlement negotiations are confidential. But I want to blow up the rumor. It's not true.
Leo Terrell heads the Federal Task Force to Combat Anti-Semitism at the Justice Department, appearing on WABC Radio on Thursday. He also said he would soon be visiting 10 universities to warn them, if you want federal funding, if you want to make sure that you are going to avoid lawsuits under Title VI, Title VII, if you want to make sure your tax status is correct, you have to allow Jewish American students to go to school without being harassed or tormented. The United Nations Security Council held another meeting today on the situation in the Middle East and the war in Gaza, with a focus on Israeli settlements. The UN Human Rights Office issued a report this week that found the government of Israel last year ratcheted up settlement of the occupied West Bank, including East Jerusalem, transferring its own population into the territory and unlawfully demolishing Palestinian homes, while settler violence increased in a climate of continuing impunity. Dorothy Shea is U.S. Interim Chargé d'Affaires to the UN, addressing today's Security Council meeting.
As the United States has consistently said, the future of the Middle East must look different. Fresh thinking is needed for a better tomorrow for Israelis and Palestinians alike. The stated purpose of this meeting is to report on the implementation of Resolution 2334, the passage of which was a mistake and whose ongoing discussion is a distraction from the real threats to international peace and security. Indeed, it is an impediment to this Council's work to address them. Hamas bears full responsibility for the ongoing war in Gaza and for the resumption of hostilities. Every death would have been avoided had Hamas accepted the bridge proposal that the United States offered last Wednesday. Hamas continues to hold 59 hostages captive, including 5 Americans. They must be returned to their families immediately. President, colleagues, no country would willingly allow terrorist groups to threaten its people, and Israel is no different. Israel has the right to defend itself from groups that wish to do it harm. As it relates to the West Bank, the United States supports the efforts of the Israel Defense Forces and the Palestinian Authority security forces to root out violent extremists in Jenin and Tulkarem. We welcome the announcement by the Palestinian Authority that it will end the practice of offering cash payments to the families of those who carry out terrorist attacks, which for far too long has incentivized violence against Israeli civilians and set back the prospects of peace. The time for half measures and false promises to end this abhorrent practice has passed. Hamas has steadfastly refused all attempts to extend the ceasefire in recent weeks, including the bridge proposal that would have provided calm beyond Ramadan and Passover and allowed time to negotiate a framework for a permanent ceasefire. President Trump has made clear that Hamas must release the hostages immediately, or there will be hell to pay. That is non-negotiable. The pillars of America's approach remain resolute: stand with Israel and stand for peace.
Dorothy Shea, U.S. Interim Chargé d'Affaires to the United Nations, at today's UN Security Council meeting. She referred to United Nations Security Council Resolution 2334, the subject of today's meeting, as a mistake. Jewish News Syndicate has an article that explains that resolution passed in 2016 when the Obama administration abstained in the waning days of the presidency and calls Israeli settlement activity a flagrant violation with no legal validity. Riyad Mansour is the Palestinian ambassador to the UN, also addressing the Security Council today.
Israel believes it has found the solution to the Palestine question, a solution it has often pursued in the past, but never so openly, brazenly, and viciously. The Palestinians will have to choose death in their land or life elsewhere. Instead of ending its occupation, its illegal occupation, it is attempting to end the occupied people. This is evident in the genocide still underway in Gaza to promote the so-called voluntary migration of Palestinians, the code name of mass forcible displacement and transfer of the Palestinian people from their land. But this is also evident in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, in the latest and most massive ethnic cleansing campaign since 1967. This crime is taking place as we speak in the northern part of the West Bank, while all eyes are on the horrific genocide in Gaza. Israel has forcibly displaced, as many of you have indicated, over 40,000 Palestinians in a matter of weeks. It is destroying refugee camps in an attempt to convince Palestine refugees that not only will they not return to their homes, villages, and towns, but that their only horizon is to be displaced time and time again.
Riyad Mansour, the Palestinian ambassador to the United Nations at today's UN Security Council meeting in New York City. Story from NBC News. Israel ordered its troops to permanently seize parts of the Gaza Strip to be annexed to Israel unless Hamas hands over the remaining hostages, Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz said Friday. The statement came after Israel this week broke the 2-month ceasefire with Hamas with resumption of airstrikes and ground operations in Gaza, killing nearly 600 people. That was from NBC News. Washington Today continues in a moment.
For 46 years, C-SPAN has been your unfiltered window into democracy, giving you direct access to Congress, the Supreme Court, and the White House. But this public service isn't guaranteed. C-SPAN receives no government funding and relies on supporters like you. All this month, in honor of Founders Day and Brian Lamb's vision, you can help keep democracy unfiltered.
To the American people, now is the time to tune in to C-SPAN.
Donate now at cspan.org/donate.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app and wherever you get your podcasts. A story from Axios. Senate Democrats are launching a new whistleblower portal for public and private workers to dish on how President Trump and DOGE are slashing the federal government. Democrats hope whistleblowers will expose what they argue are the White House's illegal moves to unilaterally dismantle federal agencies and programs. Democrats say they want to hear from workers who are witnessing how Trump and Elon Musk have withheld funding and fired federal workers without the approval of Congress. The effort comes as Trump on Thursday signed an order aimed at shuttering the Education Department, an agency with a $268 billion budget. The portal, which launches Friday, is spearheaded by Senator Jeff Merkley, Democrat of Oregon, whose staff on the Senate Budget Committee will conduct oversight of the new tool. That was from Axios. President Trump today gave more details about which agencies will be handling the Education Department functions he wants to continue as the department itself is being dismantled.
I just want to start by saying we had a meeting yesterday on the Department of Education, which is being moved. We're going to educate the children in their states where they can get a proper education. The numbers are horrible the way it is, and we're going to make a move that's very big. I don't think it's even risky a little bit. I think it's going to be amazing. It should have been done years ago. They've been talking about doing it for many years, but nobody ever got it off. But we did. And there was great excitement and great acceptance of it by almost everybody, including a lot of Democrats, actually. I do want to say that I've decided that the SBA, the Small Business Administration, headed by Kelly Loeffler, is a terrific person, will handle all of the student loan portfolio. We have a portfolio that's very large, lots of loans, tens of thousands of loans, pretty complicated deal. And that's coming out of the Department of Education immediately, and it's going to be headed up by Kelly Loeffler at SBA, and they're all set for it. They're waiting for it. It'll be serviced much better than it has in the past. It's been a mess. And also, Bobby Kennedy, the Health and Human Services, will be handling special needs and all of the nutrition programs and everything else. Rather complex, but that's going to be headed by and handled by Health and Human Services. So I think that'll work out very well. Those two elements will be taken out of the Department of Education, and then all we have to do is get the students to get guidance from the people that love them and cherish them, including their parents, by the way, who will be totally involved in their education, along with the boards and the governors and the states. And it's going to be a great situation. I guarantee that in a few years from now, I hope I'm going to be around to see it, but I think we're going to see a lot of it. I think that you're going to have tremendous results. You're going to have results like Norway, Sweden, Denmark, a lot of the countries that do so well. I think you're going to have a lot of those results. If you look at Iowa and Indiana and Idaho, so many places that run so well, Florida, Texas, big ones, you're going to have great education, much better than it is now at half the cost. And we're not even doing it as a cost item, although you will save probably half, maybe more than that.
President Donald Trump in the White House Oval Office. From Politico, the Small Business Administration announced a wide reorganization that will cut 43% of the agency's workforce amid the Trump administration's push to remake the federal government. The agency said Friday it will be ending the expansive social policy agenda of the Biden administration, cutting non-essential jobs and returning to pre-pandemic staffing levels. That was from Politico. Wyoming Congresswoman Harriet Hagerman, Republican, writes Mediaite, faced down another hostile crowd of constituents on Thursday who were incensed at Elon Musk's DOGE cutting through the federal government. At a town hall in Wheatland, Wyoming, Hagerman pointed to spending cuts when she was pressed to defend her work in Congress. Earlier in the week, Hagerman was booed during an event in Laramie. Republicans across the country have faced heated town hall events related to DOGE cuts, and in some cases have been urged by their party leadership to stop hosting events. That was from the article at Mediaite. Here's one of the exchanges with Congresswoman Hagerman Thursday night in Wheatland, Wyoming.
But I think we're totally missing the elephant in the room and the elephant in the country. Right now we have an unelected billionaire who is... government right now as some type of careful audit. But the cuts that DOGE has been making have been willy-nilly by someone who has never served in the government, has never run a nonprofit, who has 19-year-olds infiltrating computers and agencies and making decisions. And he wasn't elected, and when beneficial to him, Trump says, Musk leads DOGE. In court, he says an unknown bureaucrat named Amy Gleason, I'm not sure if you've ever met her, that she leads DOGE. So who is Musk accountable to? What qualifies him to be making these cuts? It's not an audit. You can't tell me that. You cannot tell me in 2 months he's audited all these agencies.
So you want me to answer your question?
I do, please.
Okay, so first of all, the idea of people attacking Musk because he's an unelected employee of the federal government is extremely rich to me when I have been fighting unelected bureaucrats for 25 years in every single agency. Let me tell you about DOGE, and let me tell you how we got appointed to this position. DOGE was established by the president as an office within the executive office of the president by reorganizing the existing U.S. digital service created by President Obama to promote efficiency in government. Elon Musk has a top secret security clearance which was provided to him by the Biden administration. He is an employee of the White House and is classified as a special government employee, which is a category that was created by Congress. Thanks Susan Rice under Joe Biden. President Biden and other presidents have had senior advisors who are special government employees. Musk is not the head of DOGE. Amy Gleason is the acting director. DOGE reports its current savings at $105 billion, and ultimately, as I said a moment ago, it is an audit. It is the closest thing that we are ever going to get to zero-based budgeting in the federal government. And again, what I cannot understand, whether he is a billionaire, a millionaire, or someone who is just, as he says, tech support, all he is doing is going in and looking at every single agency and how the money is being spent. Now, I have a question for you. Do you think that you are entitled to know how your money is being spent? Do you think that you have the right to know what USAID has been doing over the last 40 years? Do you think that you have the right to know what the Veterans Administration has been spending its money on? The Department of Defense? The Department of Defense is pushing $1 trillion in annual budget. They have not passed an audit in 8 years. In 8 years, that is unacceptable, and there is not, and also DOGE will be going through their budget. And what we did with that money is we specified how it is to be spent. That's why we're talking about raises specifically for the enlisted men and women, as an example.
But that's your job, not Musk's job.
That is your job. That's what we did. That's what we did. That was us that did it. That's what we did. So next question, right over here.
Congresswoman Harriet Hagerman, Republican of Wyoming, at a town hall meeting in Wheatland, Wyoming, Thursday night. Washington Post writes, from the start of his second term, President Donald Trump and his administration signaled a willingness, even a desire, to flout the law in their quest to overhaul the federal government. And while the wheels of justice turn slowly, less than 2 months later, a procession of judges have already ruled the administration has done exactly that. In more than a dozen cases, and in 3 major rulings this week alone, a federal judge has ruled that the administration either has violated the law or has probably done so. The total works out to one such finding about every 4 days. The cases in which a judge has reached such a ruling span Trump's efforts to freeze federal funding, fire federal workers, restrict diversity efforts, overturn birthright citizenship, and, most recently, limit transgender rights and deport certain immigrants without legal review. That was the Washington Post article. Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, Democrat of Minnesota, was asked about this at her town hall Thursday night in Minneapolis.
You and other Democrats have talked about how you're filing huge lawsuits against the administration, but we've seen Trump ignore courts before, and we have to assume that these lawsuits will take a long time. What happens if the courts rule against him and the Trump administration still refuses to comply and nothing changes? What will change?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's a good question, a real worry. We all have the anxiety. Obviously, these checks and balances were created with the idea in mind that we would have an executive that cared about the rule of law, that cared about their oath of office, that cared about the Constitution. I don't think our founding fathers could have imagined someone as lawless and as callous could ever become the president of the United States like Trump. I'm sure they're rolling over in their graves at the moment. My understanding is that when the rulings are ignored, obviously the judges have the ability to say, why aren't you following through? It is a process, and we know our justice system is slow moving. Then they have tools in their toolbox, right? They can sanction them. They can issue a fine for the number of days that they're not abiding by that, and then they can eventually hold them in contempt and jail them. And send the marshals to pick up the folks who are supposed to carry out the orders. That's the judges, the particular judge whose order is not being followed can do that. But that is again a process. The biggest worry is that as things move through the courts, we're 90 days away from the Supreme Court possibly hearing some of these cases. So what those rulings might actually look like, and how do we move forward after that? Again, because this is so unprecedented, it is a scary and confusing time for a lot of people. We've created litigation and response task force for the Democratic caucus. There's about 40 of us that are members of that, and every day we're working through some of these scenarios to see what the possibilities are.
Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, Democrat of Minnesota, at a town hall meeting in Minneapolis Thursday night. Colorado Democratic Senator Michael Bennet begins National Public Radio, stopped short Wednesday of calling on Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer to step down from leadership, but came pretty darn close. He said at a town hall in Golden, "I do think, on the leadership question, it's always better to examine whether folks are in the right place, and we're certainly going to have that conversation." Schumer has come under widespread criticism from House Democrats and within his own caucus for voting to advance GOP legislation that would prevent a shutdown of the federal government. Schumer had signaled that Republicans didn't have the votes to advance the spending measure, but later shifted course, arguing the bill's passage was the lesser of two evils. Reporting from National Public Radio. Senator Michael Bennet held another town hall meeting Thursday night in Colorado Springs and again got the question about whether Senator Schumer should remain the Democratic leader.
What are your thoughts about Chuck Schumer having voted yes on the CR bill, and thoughts on him stepping down from leadership, because I don't believe he's made for this moment right now?
On the leadership question, it's not a secret that we've been having debates there about what the future should look like, and I did say last night, and I'll say again, that I think we should be looking at all the Democratic leadership, and that's not a new idea for me. I mean, I was the first senator after Joe Biden's terrible debate with Donald Trump to say that we were going to lose in a landslide if we didn't make a change, and I took no joy in that, by the way. We have a lot to thank Joe Biden for. We really do. We really do. Not the least of which was beating Donald Trump to begin with. And he also was critical to keeping Space Command here in El Paso County, which I'm grateful for. But that's, we should always be asking whether we're fielding the best team. And I don't have a more clear answer for you tonight.
Senator Michael Bennet, Democrat of Colorado, at a town hall meeting Thursday night in Colorado Springs. When President Donald Trump signed the executive order Thursday to close the federal education department, sending money and the authority over much of the education policy, he said, to the states, there were many Republican governors with him at the White House, including Greg Abbott of Texas, Mike Braun of Indiana, Mike DeWine of Ohio, Kim Reynolds of Iowa, and Ron DeSantis of Florida. Governor DeSantis today spoke at the National Review Institute Summit being held at National Harbor, Maryland, about the Trump administration's agenda and interaction with governors.
So, Governor, you were elected in the first Trump administration, served under Biden, had quite a few disagreements there. In 2023, you had this little project, spent a lot of quality time in Iowa, and now you're back, Governor, with the Trump administration a second term. What's it like working with the Trump administration compared to the Biden administration, and are Anything different this second time around, or?
Well, to say we worked with the Biden administration would probably be an abuse of language. We didn't really do that. We basically had to fight them across the board on issue after issue. I mean, I was at the signing for the Department of Education, unwinding whatever the president can do, he's going to do. I think ultimately Congress would need to shutter the agency. But when we did our women's sports protection bill 4 or 5 years, we were the first state, I think, to do that too. Biden responded to DOE by saying they were going to take away the lunch money for the poor kids, this free and reduced lunch money. And I'm just thinking to myself, like, man, these guys are really committed to this ideology that they would try to do things like that. I set up a program summer of 2021. We had coronavirus Delta wave that hit the Sun Belt. And I set up monoclonal antibody clinics. So literally these people would come, they'd get the monoclonal, and it cured it, basically. I mean, it was unbelievable success. And I had them all over the state, and we used our emergency management people. And then once it was clear that this was working and people were excited, Biden took away our monoclonal supply. I had to do a separate deal with a different company. So that's just kind of the way it was. The first Trump administration was good, but I think he's got a much more aggressive posture to devolve power to the states in the second term, because I think that he's reached the conclusion, which I agree with, this bureaucracy up here is a huge, huge problem. It's wielding power the founders never intended it to wield. Part of that is because Congress, through their ineptitude, through their lack of assertiveness, have empowered this administrative state. But sending things to the states is a way to go around that. You honestly will save a lot of money, too. And I know that's a project that's ongoing. So send us education money, send us the FEMA money. Just give me the money and I'll handle the disaster, right? So I think you have that sense. It's good.
Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, a Republican at the National Review Institute Summit at National Harbor, Maryland. Sitting beside him, his wife, Florida First Lady Casey DeSantis, who, it's being speculated, may want to run for governor herself next year when Ron DeSantis is term limited. She was asked about it.
As you're aware, there is growing speculation you will run for governor. So, have you given that any thought? And can you make these reporters in this room freak out and run to go tell the editors you've got news?
Well, first of all, I mean, this guy's the GOAT. Like, honestly, like everything that he says he's going to do, he does, right? And I'm just sitting here listening to him, and he makes it sound really easy. Like, I did this, and I did this, and we did this, and now our voter registration is 1.2 million Republicans, more than Democrats, and we did this, and we turned the vote, and all of this stuff. Florida's the free state of Florida because you've got the GOAT in the governor's office because of one key thing: having a backbone. And when you have the opportunity to stand up for what's right, you're courageous, and you put yourself into the arena, and you fight like heck. And I'll tell you what, I've been around politics and I've seen a lot of people. Not a lot of people have a backbone like him. They get into office because they want to be somebody. They don't want to do good things. They don't want to get criticized. They like the cocktail parties. They think about what's next on the next political rung in their career. Like, the founders never thought that politics should ever have been a career, right? You were supposed to go up and serve, and you come home and you live under the laws that you pass. But it's really changed. And so I have to just applaud him, because all of what he has done is extremely fragile, right? Like, you could get somebody in and all of this revert back. And I'll tell you, Florida, like, in so many instances, it is the free state, and it is an inspiration to a lot of other states across the United States. But having the opportunity to travel around the world, people across the globe know about what he has done, and they are so proud. So it's the long-winded answer of saying, we'll see, right? We'll see.
Florida First Lady Casey DeSantis with her husband, Governor Ron DeSantis, at the National Review Institute Summit at National Harbor, Maryland. Florida Phoenix, part of State's newsroom, writing about that exchange. The First Lady would face obstacles in the 2026 primary against Congressman Byron Donalds, whom President Trump is backing. Earlier this week, Senator Rick Scott, whom Ron DeSantis succeeded, said on the Fox News' Brian Kilmeade show that Donalds would win the race. Wall Street today, the Dow up 32, NASDAQ up 92, S&P up 4. And finally on Washington today, an update on the price of eggs. Hoosier Ag Today reports the price that you're paying for a carton of eggs at your grocery store has likely dropped a little lower compared to what it was just 1 month ago. That initial spike in egg prices was a result of an increased number of bird flu cases across the U.S. since the beginning of the year. USDA Secretary Brooke Rollins says one factor for the recent drop in egg prices is that far fewer eggs are now leaving the country. She also says the Agriculture Department is working to temporarily increase the import of eggs in order to increase the supply available for consumers. Reporting from Hoosier Ag Today, Secretary Rollins spoke today to reporters in the White House driveway.
Secretary Rollins, you mentioned that the U.S. will start importing some eggs from South Korea and another undisclosed country. How many eggs are we talking, and can you name the other countries?
Right now, we've got Turkey and South Korea importing eggs. Just yesterday, I talked to a couple of other countries that will soon begin importing. We haven't signed that deal yet, so I don't want to say who it is. We are talking in the hundreds of millions of eggs for the short term, so not insignificant, but significant enough to help continue to bring the prices down for right now. And then when our chicken populations are repopulated and we've got a full egg-laying industry going again, hopefully in a couple of months, we then shift back to our internal egg layers and moving those eggs out onto the shelf.
What's the status of bird flu and its impact on chickens?
Well, the good news is part of the 5-point plan we laid out about a month ago. The most important thing to control the bird flu, the avian flu epidemic that has been raging through our egg layers for almost 2 years now, this really started about 2 years ago, is that the most proven way to solve for that is through biosecurity measures. And what that means is locking down your barns. The number one prong on our plan was to invest a significant amount of money to do audits across the country, to have USDA help these egg-laying companies to secure their barns. And since we began doing that most recently, we've seen a significant decline in the bird flu.
Agriculture Secretary Brooke Rollins in the White House driveway. An article at Newsweek, the Agriculture Department said wholesale egg prices had dropped almost 50% since late last year, and the New York wholesale egg price, which peaked at $8.53 per dozen, had steadily declined to $4.08 as of March 19th. Thank you for listening to Washington Today. Sign up for C-SPAN's evening newsletter Word for Word and get the stories making headlines in Washington emailed to you every day. Subscribe at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night and weekend.